Hey, welcome to How to Play, brought to you by the Games Capital. Today the game we're looking at is by the very well-respected designer Uwe Rosenberg, and the game is called Patchwork. Now this is a game all about making quilts. Now it might seem like an unusual subject, but the game is actually a really great two-player game. So before we get into how we're going to make these quilts, let's have a look at what's in the box. So in Patchwork, each player will receive one of these player boards, which represents the quilt that they're going to be building or making. It's just basically a grid. There's also a central board which is used for keeping track of time in the game. And then of course there are the patches, which consist of these various different shaped tiles. Some of them have these little buttons on them, but they're all different configurations, different shapes. There's a whole bunch of those that are laid out in a circle around the central board. There are also 5 little single patchwork pieces that are placed on that board as well, in the locations that are marked on the board. There is a series of buttons, and the buttons are the currency in this particular game. So there's a heap of those, which you make a little pile of in the centre of the table. A couple of wooden tokens. Each player has a time token, which they keep track of their time in the game. There's a neutral token, which determines which tiles are available at any one time. And finally, a little 7x7 bonus tile, which we'll talk about a little later. So they're the components for Patchwork. Now let's have a look at how to play. So to begin a game of Patchwork, each player will receive 5 buttons as a starting currency. You'll determine who the start player is going to be in some way, and both of you will place your time tokens on the first spot of the time track, and then the start player will have their turn. Now, on your turn, you've got a choice of 2 things. The first option, which is going to be the most common thing, is taking one of the patches. Now this is determined by where this neutral token is. The 3 tiles that are next to the starting token or the neutral token are the tokens that are available for purchase on your turn. And then, depending on which tile you want to take, there's going to be a cost. And the cost is in buttons and also in time. Now some tiles only have a button cost, some tiles only have a time cost, but the majority of them have both. So for example, this tile is going to cost 5 buttons. So I would need to pay my 5 buttons back to the supply. And it also has a cost of 5 times. So I would move my token 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces on the time track. And then I can place this token anywhere I like on my board. I can flip it over, make it fit where it needs to, but I place it on my tile. Then I take this token and I place it where the tile was that I took, which now makes a new set of tiles available for the next turn. Now, as well as that, every time on this time track that you pass a space with a button, that triggers a payout. So this is one of the ways to gain income. So by moving 5 spaces, I've passed a button. The income that I get is determined by the number of buttons that I have on tiles on my board. So with this first tile, there were 2 buttons. So now I would gain income of 2 buttons for my next turn. Now, the second option, if you don't want to take a tile, or maybe you can't afford to take any of the tiles or they don't fit, you can, instead of taking a tile, take income. Now the way this works is that you must move your token a number of spaces so that you are at exactly 1 space in front of the other player. And then you take an amount of buttons equal to the number of spaces that you've moved. So in this instance, if green was to take income, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces, he would take an income of 6. And as well as that, he's passed a button, so he'd also get the button income if he had any buttons on his board. So that could be quite a lucrative move. And that would be the end of that person's turn. Now, the interesting thing about this game as well is that the turns aren't sequential. So one player has a turn and then the next player, it doesn't work like that. Basically, as long as you are behind on the time track, you will have your turn. So depending on the cost, if one player is quite a way ahead, you might have 2 or 3 turns before you finally get in front of them, and then it would move to the other player's turn. So that makes for an interesting strategy during the game. Now, the other thing that we touched on before were these single patch pieces. Once again, when your token moves past one of those tokens on the board, first person to do that will claim the single patch. And they can then place that onto their board, perhaps fill in a gap that is tricky to fill in. They can be very useful as well. All right, so what you're trying to do is fill your board most efficiently. Try and get it as full as you can. There's also a bonus, this tile, for completing a 7x7 grid on your board. Now the board is a 9x9 grid, but if you're the first player to completely fill a 7x7 grid, then you get to claim this token. At the end of the game, this is going to be worth 7 points, which is quite a bit. So that's a goal that you can try and set yourself during the game, to complete that 7x7 grid. The game continues until each player reaches the end of the time track. When the last player gets to the end of the time track, that's the end of the game. You get a final payout because you will have passed that last button, and at that point you add up the total buttons that you have in your supply. Then you need to subtract 2 points for every empty space on your board, and at that point whoever has the highest score is the winner. And that, my friends, is Patchwork. So Patchwork is a fantastic 2-player game. It's very puzzly, obviously, with all these little pieces that need to fit together in certain ways. You've got to decide which tiles, as the token moves around, are going to be best to fit into those places. Make sure you've got enough enough buttons to try and get those correct tiles. Great little game. If you're after a good 2-player game that doesn't take too long, very simple to learn, then definitely check out Patchwork. And of course, if you like quilting, well then it's a no-brainer. All right, thanks for watching. Happy gaming.